Hello, class. I would like to talk to you about the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. Some of the pre-information, maybe some of the violent acts that occurred, and ultimately what happened afterwards. So let's start out with some of the pre-information. Yeah. So the thing that really caused this all to come about was the Panic of 1873. Okay, and that really caused a lot of disruption financially for railroad companies, and so the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad ultimately cut pay for workers, and they were a 10% down on their pay, and that brought them to $1.35, which is unlivable stuff. And railroad work is dangerous, so if you're not compensated properly, it's really not worth it. But if you're living in those times, that's a lot of the work that's out there. So anyway, uh, so before the strike, some workers decided to act out a little bit, and so they went to protest, and the police were able to stop them, and so they felt like their voices weren't heard. So they took their protest to Martinsburg, and that was the end of the Baltimore Ohio Railroad, and they decided to protest there. And so that's where the protest started, July 16th, 1877. And this is kind of where we can just talk about the violent events that happened. And so at this point, uh, some smaller strikes and stuff started to happen, and small isolated violent acts and stuff. So one of the first things that the workers did was they stopped a cattle cart, and they disconnected it from the train, caused a lot of havoc, trying to disrupt the operation of the railroad, and let the cows bake, so they um, you know could disrupt the railroad. Anyway, so the militia was sent there, and one of the strikers actually got killed. He got shot, and one militia member was injured, and so that was like the first violent thing. Another thing that happened, a bunch of protesters hid under a bridge so they could throw debris at a train and on the track, maybe try and do something, damage property and stuff. Um, a group of Maryland National Guard was met with strikers throwing bricks, and so they acted by shooting in the air, and a couple of them actually shot in the crowd, and they killed 10 strikers, and that was like one of the first events that really caused um, some more extreme stuff down the road. Another clash on July 21st, some Philadelphia troops were met with a mob of 6,000 people, and they had a Gatling gun, and they were heavily armed, and so they ended up having to kill 20 people out of that mob, and uh, they lived. So, well, not the 20 people that died; they died, but um, and after that, there was a mob armed um, on a train. They actually took a train, and they were hunting down um, some soldiers, and the soldiers, they had to flee because, man, some dudes on a train coming after you with some guns. Phew, you gotta watch out for that. So they had to leave, and those people actually set the town on fire and everything. They were like bridge that they caught on fire, and they were destroying a lot of stuff. So that was and then there were some general strikes that started, from the whole railroad movement. Like steel workers, miners got in on the action too, and that was kind of a weird thing to me. I never really thought about that happening. After a while, the strikes spread from all the way from the Midwest to the Northeast, and really went everywhere. But there were some unions like the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and the Order of Railroad Conductors that actually like frowned upon the acts of the mobs, and they turned their back on it basically, and they were like, this is not us. So they feared the mobs of strikers and stuff, and so that's kind of shows you how these mobs maybe they weren't speaking for the rest of everybody. But the strikes ultimately ended with the Federal Army able to hold shut them down basically, because a lot of these events were isolated. You know, they weren't organized. They were just random. But you know, the Federal Army, um, you know, they stayed strong. A lot of the militias that actually were sent to handle this stuff, they talked to the strikers, and the strikers actually kind of brought them on to the strike. So militias being sent just did not work, and that was kind of, you know, that's where the federal army came in, and they were able to stop that stuff. And so anyway, the strike ultimately ended on July 31st, 1877, and overall, 100,000 workers had taken action in the striking. About 1,000 were arrested the whole time, and around 100 people died because of all this. Um, so ultimately, the protests accomplished basically nothing, and all the politicians kind of looked at it and they were like, you know, we could do some reforms on, you know, labor stuff, but they actually didn't. So basically, the railroad just continued to run over unions and, you know, continue to cut pay, which, you know, affected people all over in the, you know, railroad company. So anyway, thank you.